lack of transparency results in distrust and a deep sense of insecurity. Those are the words of the Dalai Lama. This is Talking About here on WSN, Sean Michael Small, once again on the Sister Isle, a beautiful sunny day here, and thankful to put the worst parts of the weather behind us. Of course, Hurricane Beryl, as it fluctuates in strength, but I believe it hit the United States recently, and we in the Caribbean have to deal with the fallout at a time where we are still technically, even though you might not think of it, recovering from the pandemic, as well as recovering from inflation with regards to our food import bill and other global pressures. And one could only imagine as more and more of these situations add up, what will be left available to deal with these things. 2 budgets ago, I asked what would be our national, our TNT insurance policy in case something unforeseen happens, something bad happens. And then, of course, we saw the war in Ukraine, we saw food prices go up. I saw a video most recently where someone, his grocery bill went from 100 and something US for a month's worth of food. And if he clicked the purchase again button to purchase the exact same items, 45 items from an American, I think it was a Walmart. That was 2 years ago, and now it's $400. We're not the only ones experiencing this. And it's not to say that it can't happen. And amidst all of that, amidst the fact that we're playing a balancing act and potentially a dangerous game with regards to what we do with our budget now, because we don't have enough money to meet all of our needs. With all of that, where we do spend our money, at times, there is a lack of transparency. With regards to decisions being made, there's a lack of transparency. And once again, I do wonder if people in parliament, members of government, and I'm not saying that the other side will not do this, but we'll work with what we have right now. This current administration, I didn't experience the partnership as deeply as this one. Of course, the partnership had a different set of circumstances. But under this environment where my colleague and co-host, Mr. Keaton Shaw, wonders, does anyone really want to win the next election because the economy is so bad? I do wonder if too many politicians think that, or to rephrase it, forget that public service is different to private practice, to private business. You have a right to privacy when it's not the public purse, when it's not public funds. So keep those things in perspective, to connect the dots. These tragedies are not necessarily directly linked to questions about transparency in TNT. But then the fact of the matter is, when we ask ourselves, what's going on? Why is there a problem? How did a problem occur? Because we're basically doing that in a lot of different areas, and we're not necessarily putting it all together to make a whole picture. But when we ask ourselves those questions, with the NICU deaths in the hospital, with crime, with the cost of food, with cost of living, are we going to ask ourselves, well, maybe we should have fought for more transparency so we would have known what was going on before we felt the consequences, before we felt the results of decisions, as opposed to putting our head in the sand, shelving the problem, saying God is a Trinity and somehow we'll make it out of this. Fact of the matter is, more advanced economies, more developed economies, richer economies than us are going through similar problems. So let's not use that as an excuse, one, but let's not also think somehow magically we'll be immune to problems that more robust economies are facing. We're not. With that said, there's a lot to get into before we welcome our guests, so let's kick off today's Daily Review. And apologies, we couldn't have a show yesterday, so there are a lot of stories that are piled up from over the weekend, and of course, some stories that hit today. One of the stories coming out of yesterday would have been, I believe early yesterday morning, would have been a quadruple murder in the community of Black Rock, Tobago, which has pushed the murder rate of Tobago past what it was last year. Last year's total, we are in July, just 9 days over the halfway mark. Now, it's the same old story as before. Not all of the members were targets. The people who spoke to the media believes one of the individuals might have been the target. At least one or two of the individuals might have been collateral damage. I don't know if you're like me, where it's one thing to hear about somebody killed and we try to put the excuse of gangsters killing gangsters. Murder is still murder. But then on top of that, collateral damage, unintended deaths, or rather deaths that had no real relation to the purpose of whatever this gang warfare reprisal killing is going on in Tobago. Just people who were in the wrong place, wrong time. That was almost a cliche back in the 90s in America. We're in 2024, and now it's our reality all over the place. And once again, this is a mass shooting. I mean, at this point, we should be thankful that, to some extent, we're not seeing a larger death rate. I think the last mass shooting in the Diego Martin area, can't remember the community, but there were multiple people injured. I think both of them, both in the high rises, there were multiple wounded, not just the ones who were deceased. In this case, all right, 3 were killed outright. 1 was at one point reported to be in stable condition in the hospital, Scarborough, Signal Hill, but unfortunately, he passed away. Family members of one of the deceased, they're not just lamenting the fact that their loved one was killed, but the fact that it seems as though they went out of their way to finish him off. Someone who may or may not have been an intended target. That's the point where we reach now. And then now Tobagonians are now wondering, at least some Tobagonians are wondering, you know, we want to welcome people, we want to be friendly. But then to what extent now is that friendliness going to get us killed? Because now there's another debate about how much of this is indigenous, is from Tobagonians, and how much of this is imported from Trinidad. So are you going to welcome someone into your community and unfortunately have to welcome all of their baggage, their beefs, their conflicts with them that you may not know of? And to some extent, this will potentially further set back Tobago as a tourism destination. It's not too far from various hotels on the north coast of Tobago. Tobago is not that big. Tobago is not that big. And at a time when lip service is given to diversification and tourism is one of the eggs in the basket of diversification, can we afford something like this? No. Now, the Chief Secretary is going to meet with the National Security Council. And I think some people might think this is blown out of proportion when they look at the actual figure. The actual murder rate is reported to be 16. Last year, for the whole year in Tobago, it was 14. They say it's 16 so far for the year. That might seem like small numbers when compared to Trinidad, we're at above 300 for the year. But I think the key point is not about the fact of what the murder rate is, but rather it's growing and the implication of crime is expanding. And I do think that it is a good idea for the THA and the National Security Council to meet to try to figure out ways to deal with this, because Tobago has complexities to its situation. It's a separate island, so you can't just drive to Port of Spain to do certain things, you know. You have to take a ferry or you have to take a plane to go to the rest of the country. That makes life more complex. Food has to be delivered by ship. It can't just be delivered via truck. It adds an extra cost. That makes things, anything, not just food, any sort of good or material, that makes things more complex. The complexity in the past worked because it kept Tobago semi-isolated from crime. So now the question is, we have to ask, well, what's not working anymore? Why is it becoming more pervasive? And to some extent, has things been allowed to blow up in Tobago without enough preventative measures, because maybe we took it for granted that Tobago is safer, so everything will work itself out. The communities are different, except whatever element of violence that's happening in East Port of Spain and other hotspots. Potentially, why would we think Tobago is immune? At some point, some of the similarities will be the window to open the door, well, will be the window to open to allow the violence to come through. Economic conditions, lack of opportunity, lack of hope, and who knows what else. So I do hope that something comes out of these meetings. That said, I don't know if government policy is good enough at this stage. And really and truly, it comes down to the technocrats. I don't know who are the technocrats that are going with them. We already have here on Talking Point. We don't necessarily believe in all of the technocrats in charge, but we'll leave that there for now. Moving on to the next story. This is one that I wanted to get into yesterday, and I'll try and be brief because it's not necessarily adding too much to it. But first, Major Best, former head of the SSA, who is one of the central figures of this whole thing, he has denied the coup plot in the SSA, reportedly using the word ludicrous. And he has gone on to try to defend the situation, defend the hiring practices, and spoken out against the Prime Minister's statements. And this, to some extent, is where what the Prime Minister said and how he said it and the limitations of that presentation, to some extent, it leaves the window open now for Major Best to speak out. Now, one of the things working against Major Best is the fact that sources to the media, they were the first to speak about some of these things. And the Prime Minister did not necessarily say too much new information, give us too much new details. However, other sources are now coming out to basically call this a witch hunt. Trying to give alternative explanations that the weapons that the SSA inherited when it was reformed in 2016, trying to point to Major Best's record in national security, and that a lot of the claims from the Prime Minister is misinformation. Now, again, we had a source to the media. Maybe that was a government-approved leak. Maybe it was not. But at the end of the day, to some extent, there's too much subjectivity here because, as I said, we need to see now this thing go to trial. And something like this is not going to go to trial quickly. Right? What I mean to say, it's not like we're going to fast track it. In fact, it's the opposite. We don't want to see it fast track per se. Something like this is not going to necessarily quickly go to trial or go quickly to trial enough. And maybe, to some extent, this is where the Prime Minister himself should have been a bit more careful with what he said and how he said it. But the problem is, at the end of the day, while I can understand criticisms like that, and I mean, I just presented it, right? Ultimately, my position would be that, hold on, I would like more information, so I can't really fault the Prime Minister for speaking out. I think in this case, it would have been good if other members of the national security apparatus also gave or spoke on the issue in ways that they could speak about it. The Prime Minister, of course, as a politician, people are going to assume certain biases. People are going to assume certain competencies and incompetencies because he's not a police officer, he's a politician, he's a volcanologist, right? He's not a national security professional per se. So you want to hear from him as the leader, but then you also want to hear from the other technocrats, leading technocrats, to give us some more technical details about the who, what, when, who, where, how of the matter. With that said, the political scientists, they want more to clarify these claims, because remember, it's protected by Parliament. To some extent, one could argue it's protected, therefore it's not liable or slanderous against Major Best, but you're throwing accusations out there, and potentially Major Best, Pastor Brown, for whatever it's worth, can't necessarily defend themselves against these sort of things. They haven't had their day in court yet. Now, again, courts of public opinion, these things are somewhat subjective. Where are the technocrats? Well, the Commissioner of Police, just to segue into the next story, she said that, well, it's the investigation is at a sensitive stage, she can't speak about it. I interpret that as the investigation is at a sensitive stage, yes, but we are not confident in what we can or cannot mention or speak about it. And I get it. In other jurisdictions, sometimes someone says too much and it does harm the court proceedings. I get that. But the flip side is, to some extent, what did I say with some similar instances before? When things happen, what do you get? You get the political leadership, whether it's the mayor, whether it's the governor, whether it's the senator, whether it's the president, or in this case, the prime minister. But then also you might get the head of the local police, the head of the investigation itself, all kind of giving whatever information they can give and then affirming that there are certain things, certain details that they can't reveal, give us a potential timeline of how this thing might go, etc., etc. It's managing expectations to some extent. It's marketing, it's politics, it's not actually important to law enforcement, but it's also leadership so that we can have confidence in the situation. And given the track record of the people involved and the fact that I think at this point, I myself personally am all too fed up of, well, we can't talk about it because it's an open investigation and sensitive. Yeah, I get that. There are certain things you can't talk about, but essentially, you're asking us to trust you at a time when we have a hard time trusting you. More importantly, what is happening potentially, while it's a serious situation, yes. And I am willing to believe the Prime Minister, in part because, not necessarily completely, but in part because sources were speaking to the media before the government wanted to speak to the media about some of these things. At the end of the day, you are infringing on people's rights. And we do need to have enough of a justification for that. And saying, trust me, it's there, is not enough. Now, if a member of the opposition was writing, if the Joint Select Committee on National Security had oversight privately behind closed doors of sensitive matters that are political in nature, so that they could read it and say, well, there's enough there, that would help. Although given how politics are these days, I can understand why people don't necessarily think that would work because politics is so divisive right now. Now, with that said, I want to get to the next story because I mentioned the Commissioner of Police. And this one I found somewhat interesting. By the way, before I move on, the opposition leader did make a case earlier on that this might be a dead cat tactic, as she put it. Basically a shocking announcement to divert media attention away from problems or failures in other areas of society. Although, to be fair, I do think that this situation highlights some of the problems, whether directly or indirectly. It depends on if you put stock in the state's response or the state's responsibility for overseeing the SSA and potentially failing there. So I understand where the opposition leader is coming from, but it's not as though the Prime Minister kind of pulled this out of his hat, unless somebody was really strategically smart and leaked information authorized secretly by the state, and then to allow the prime minister to then, you know, give us a follow-up, a layup later on. But I don't think this clears the government, because whenever people say that it's a distraction, I find it very funny that we're going to be distracted by a controversy that is potentially just as bad or potentially worse than what they're trying to distract us from. That's not really a good look. That's not very effective in terms of distracting us. Because, moving on to the next story now, I didn't mention, the Commissioner of Police did not want to speak about this investigation. And I believe she was questioned at the Joint Select Committee of National Security. And hold that point. At the JSC, she revealed something very interesting. Violent crime somehow is down by 15%. Somehow. Don't mind that the murder rate is technically, I think one less when compared to this time last year, something like that. And technically, kidnappings, and this is to tell you how statistics could be misleading. Allegedly, apparently, kidnappings are up 100% between now and this time last year. 100%, because it went from 1 to 2. One figure sounds very scary. The other figure sounds relatively benign, relatively. It's the same thing. 15% reductions in serious crimes. Murder, haven't really seen a reduction. More mass shootings. We just saw one. Tobago, breaking records. And what is interesting is we juxtapose that with the fact that the Prime Minister is saying, oh wait, there was a coup attempt coming down the pipe. Not from some sort of religious movement external to the government, like we saw you know, with the Jamaat al-Muslimin. To what extent they were involved informally with politicians is a separate story. But it's not like that was an official arm of the state. It's not like we're seeing what we see in Haiti right now, where gang violence got so far out of control that the state essentially lost control of the capital city. That's not what we're seeing. We're seeing an internal and one of the most important national security services, apparently a coup coming from that. But serious crime is down 15%, you know? Serious crime is down 15%. Meanwhile, the Minister of National Security, he launched a new competition, $30,000, 3 age categories. You can check it out in the papers. I don't want to go through all the details. Basically to promote, I guess you could say, the fight against crime. To have anti-crime songs in this competition. So young people between the various age brackets could sing on the music of The Call, I believe, or The Calling, a song that was recently released by several local artists, to try to promote a message of anti-crime, being against violence, etc. And to make a long story short, the opposition said something that was correct and incorrect, true and false at the same time. Opposition MP Dr. Munal Ruel says, we can't sing our way out of crime. Yes, he is to some extent correct. But here's the thing. Some people might expect me to ridicule the Minister of National Security over an initiative like this. But it's an initiative that's, well, there's a $30,000 prize pool. That's not that expensive when terms to a government budget. And if it can have a positive impact on the crime situation in the long run, that might be well worth it. And that's the thing. What the minister is doing with this competition, by the way, the commissioner wasn't there. Other members of National Security was there, but she wasn't there for the launch because she was at the JSC. What the minister is doing with this competition, I believe is correct. Sports heroes, art, established artists, young artists, artistic messaging, all of these things help a culture, help form a culture, strengthen it to have some sort of ideology, identity, to work counter to the message of violence and criminal gangs and reprisal killings, etc., etc. Because at some point, a lot of the gangs are going to be dependent on the fact that young men and young women feel abandoned by the system, by society, and a national identity and a cultural identity strong enough. I believe this is one of the, essentially the points that one of our callers from Tobago was making months ago. The fact that Afro-Trinidadians, the cultural traditions from long time, it was stripped from them. That's one of the things that has to be overcome. But what about our TNT national identity, our TNT culture? Is it robust enough to be a stalwart against people who feel as though the country is not working for them? Because part of the messaging will be to encourage them, or even outright show them, no, this is what the country means to all of us and how it can help us. And at the end of the day, this project, I think, is a step in the right direction. The key point is, it's not going to deal with the crime today. It's not going to help with the mass shootings that are happening right now. This is something that will help in the long run, and it's needed, because if all you do is think about short-term solutions, well, then you'll be putting out fires for perpetually. But we also need short-term solutions because people are dying right now, and long-term solutions will take years to really impact, because you have to change society and the culture of society, get people to believe in society, and then back that up with real opportunity, real capacity for them to find their way in the world and not be broke, not be destitute, not be disadvantaged, not be taken advantage of or exploited by private businessmen or by gangs and the criminal underworld. So you have to have both. You have to have something where the messaging will get them to look in another direction, and then you have to provide that other direction to some capacity. You don't have to provide 100% of it for 100% of the people, but you have to provide enough for enough people that we get the numbers down. But until then, we have mass shootings. So this is why I said Dr. Rudal Munilal is both right and wrong. We need this, and this is not a big investment in terms of money. Will it be effective? I don't know. But for $30,000, I don't mind the minister trying this out. Why not? It's similar to the police, community policing and community outreach. We need more long-term solutions to this, but that also means that we need some things fixed in the Ministry of Education and our education system in general. Let's just get that. Ease of doing business also has a part to play here. But the opposition is also correct. What about now? What's going to stop the violence now? Because a competition for 10-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 19-year-olds is not necessarily going to stop 25-year-olds who already had friends killed, who feel that the system is not going to get them justice. That's part of it. But then who also feel that the system is working against them, and they're going to take matters into their own hands, and they don't care who doesn't like it anymore. Because to them, it's every man for themselves. And that's why we need something for Trinbagonians to understand, no. In the long run, we will rise together or we will fall together. Let's take a break. When we come back, hopefully we should have our guests. 2 pieces of legislation went through. Some questions over the details over them. Stay tuned. Show Michael Small. This is to come on WESN. We'll be back after this.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
Welcome back to Talk About. My guest isn't ready just yet, so we'll move on with more stories from the Daily Review coming out of the weekend. So, you know, take the chance to clear the backlog, so to speak. You may have seen it. I think the news came out on Monday or over the weekend. Someone who is alleged to be a friend of the Prime Minister who gave the Prime Minister a gift, a discounted rate a discounted rate on a townhouse that led to the whole Inez Gate controversy that to some extent also caused a lot of questions with regards to the Integrity Commission, right? Not entirely sure what I feel about with regards to drawing a conclusion about that whole situation, but Mr. Warner, Mr. Alan Warner, apparently has been charged by the DPP's office with regards to illegal quarrying, which was interesting because at the time when I believe his son was arrested, or I'm not sure if I'm remembering the situation, the details correctly, with regards to that specific point in the timeline, when the operation was shut down by police, there were other operations neighboring that was alleged to also be illegal operations, but for whatever reason, Mr. Warner's operation was targeted that day. We haven't heard about any other illegal quarrying going on in the same area being shut down since. Now, with that said, one of the things I find interesting is opposition MP Saddam Hussein is, well, he's taken it a step further. There's controversy around Mr. Warner, and with regards to his relationship with the Prime Minister. The DPP apparently is independent. He's going to go after Warner. Cool. But also, Mr. Warner had an FUL application, which allegedly, the Prime Minister may have inquired about, may have tried to, and the implication is that there was some pressure to push it through or to fast track it, right? But, and this might have been during the tenure of Commissioner Guy Griffith, which, if that is the case, would make the government somewhat hypocritical. But again, it has to be proven that that is the case. And to some extent, in a perfect world, the Prime Minister asking about an application is just that. He's asking, okay, all right, I have a friend. The friend just wants to know. Knowing, I don't think is illegal. The problem is, if knowing puts silent, if the question will put silent pressure, you know, hey, what's going on with this? And then the person is like, well, we're at XYZ stage, and it puts silent pressure to push it through. What I do find interesting, though, is that to some extent, my initial thought was MP Hussein needed to be careful. The opposition's whole point is to try to get more people FULs. You want to be careful how you kind of criticize the situation. You don't make it the poster child of slowing down the FUL process. But with that said, I do think that one of the things that this whole Alan Warner situation highlights is, with regards to the gray area, how much do we like subjectivity in the situation with regards to how much should a gift be, right? To what extent will a prime minister be able, not necessarily to fast track things, but even to just inquire about things? Sometimes things are taking too slow. And it's not that they're fast tracking it above everybody else, but we kind of depend to some extent in TNT for if things are too slow, slower than the norm, which is already slow, then we get a favor not to get things faster than everybody else, but to try to get things back on track like what would be the average, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. Why should, you know, some people are relying on favors just to get what's entitled to them. Was Mr. Warner entitled to a FUR? That's a whole separate story. But I'm just saying it leaves the door open on subjectivity, right? On where is the line of ethical behavior? And I do wonder if to some extent it's like transparency, and perhaps we should have situations where, or conflict of interest, where we should have things in place to avoid these things affirmatively, assertively, not leave things in areas of gray. Ooh, well, it was a gift. Well, should you be even getting a gift? Maybe we should say no gifts for parliamentarians at all. And that will just nip the question in the bud. But my guest is here. So we'll take another break. When we come back, quick, we will continue on with the conversation. Stay tuned.
Hello there and welcome to AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. Before we even start this repatriation and reintegration process, we've already failed, or are we doomed to fail?
You've got to invest in the institutions that you've established to carry out those sorts of core functions.
We now get into the regional updates to give you an understanding of what's happening across our neighboring islands.
We have available a number of films that are worth showing.
So it was day one when the French Revolution started to develop the concept of universal human rights.
What happened this time is unprecedented. It's one of the largest terrorist attacks in history.
Let's welcome Carl to the program. Carl is over there, next to sir. Hello, Carl.
Silky anteater or pygmy anteater, and we have two of the three species of anteaters right here.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Welcome back to Talk About, ladies and gentlemen, and I am joined by Opposition Senator Jayanti Lakshmi here to speak about at the least two pieces of legislation which I think should capture more attention of the national conversation. One that I believe the opposition supported, one that they did not support, but with both there were some concerns. And with that, Opposition Senator Jayanti Lakshmi, welcome to Talking Point once again. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, morning. Thank you for having me again.
Hi, so with regards to the two legislations, I guess let's start maybe with the easier one first. The opposition supported the government with the amendments to the Bail Act, I believe it were. But I think there was basically some warnings that, look, this is not going to be the be-all and end-all to solve crime. What were some of the opposition's concerns despite supporting the bill?
Well, of course, so, people the conversation and narrative has turned into we are suddenly supporting it when we didn't support it last year and we've changed. Well, it's a different piece of legislation. That's the first thing that I think needs to be pointed out. It's very different. It does not remove a judge or a magistrate or a master's discretion in order to grant bail. What it does is it sort of creates a situation where it stipulates instead you should not get bail for these specific offenses, but instead only in a case of exceptional circumstances, then you should be granted the bail. So it's for you to convince, if you appear before a judge or a master, to convince them that you should get bail if you're charged with these offenses, if you have committed an offense whilst you're out on bail, so you're what we consider a repeat offender, or you have a criminal history behind you, or if the offense involves firearm offenses. So those are kind of the three categories of offenses that the bail bill will cover. The concerns are still, as they have always been, that bail is not meant to be punishment. In the law, whether we like it or not, a person enjoys the presumption of innocence, and the purpose of bail really is to secure a person's attendance at court. If you put a person on bail or you deny them bail, let's say, and you lock them away indefinitely and you cannot start their trial and so on, and the prosecution still isn't ready to proceed with the matter after a certain amount of time, they can apply. And what I try to highlight in particular, because I did some research, I've made calls, I wanted to find out about the matters in which persons were being denied bail initially for cases as serious as murder, and then being granted bail after a period of time. And what I've been told is that, the police continue to have challenges with getting their files in order, being ready to proceed, complying with directions from the court for certain things. And unless we address those issues, then people are still going to get bail. So this thing about keeping the country safe by keeping who we consider to be dangerous repeat offenders in remand, it's not going to work. The other thing is that bail arises after you're able to arrest someone and you're able to, solve the crime, so to speak, and you bring them before the court. The detection rate is still not where we would like it to be in terms of all serious crimes. We have an even lower conviction rate. So when we speak about bail and keeping someone behind bars as a result of the restrictions being placed on bail, or it being more difficult, let's say, for somebody to access bail, if they end up, being granted bail because the prosecution can't start their case, or because eventually the case just falls apart and they're released, then, like I said, I use the analogy, we are like hamsters on a wheel, just running, in the same cycle over and over. We're not solving anything.
But then I do have to ask, is to the consideration for people who are in remand, waiting on a murder trial. We've heard this story before, 10 years or more, maybe the trial falls apart, and then depending, they may have leeway to sue the states.
Of course.
Because I guess that's one of the things for me is, and I'm not saying that everyone in this situation is innocent, right? Each case, people have their own opinions, but my fear always when rights are changed and potentially, removed or reduces, what about the innocent people that might get caught up in the criminal justice system?
And that's the point that I keep making all along, that when you are passing legislation like this, it's not just, you can't have that visceral reaction to crime that people tend to have. I am as affected by anybody else when I read about crime in the newspaper, but I also know that there are innocent people who may get caught up, if it's 1 in 100, if it's 1 in 1,000. And we still have to balance the rights, and we have to put things in place that these people can actually, have the access to the courts and enjoy the protection of the law. People like to bandy about that the opposition get bail. The first murderer to get bail was represented by Jayanti Lakshmidhyal and Ram Logan and so on. Well, that gentleman spent 9 years in prison, had no criminal record, had, no other convictions and so on, and basically waited for 9 years for the court to say, okay, we don't have enough evidence against you, even for a prima facie case, which is the lowest standard in law. So at the preliminary inquiry stage, and was said, okay, sorry, go home. after 9 years of not having access to see your children, your whole family life has fallen apart. You haven't worked, you haven't been able to advance your education, you've lost contact with your family, your community ties have all fallen apart. Not to mention, you have a 9-year gap in life that you can't explain, so you've become essentially unemployable. Now, what are we doing in cases like that? Are we protecting the public, or are we creating a scenario where someone has no choice but to maybe go back out there and turn to a life of crime?
So I want to ask, to be clear, what was it about these amendments or this set of legislation that the opposition was willing to support it, as opposed to the last set, I believe, in 2022?
So, right. So the last set said absolutely in those scenarios, firearm offenses, repeats, you have a criminal record and you have a thing, or it's one of these serious offenses that they've listed. No bail, automatic, no judicial discretion. So if you are charged for a murder and you have 3 other convictions pending for serious, violent offenses, you are in the same boat as a person who, for, let's say, a man, okay, let me use an example. A woman was recently charged for murder in St. Madeleine in Trinidad. And I mean, I don't want to highlight the case, right? But she's a grandmother, she's a housewife, and she stabbed her husband. There was some sort of dispute. The media reported that, he was drinking and so on, and something happened, and she committed the offense. Now, she was charged with murder just like a person who passed by her place and opened fire and killed 5 people. Before, the bill that the government brought last year that we did not support, those 2 persons would be in the same boat, and no judge, no master, nobody had the opportunity to consider the difference in their circumstances, the difference in their cases, and how they could be managed as potential offenders before the court in terms of ankle bracelets, being released on bail, those kinds of things. It was just automatic, no bail. Both of them were going to sit in remand yard for 9 years and wait for their trial to come up. Now, a judge or a master can take into account the particular circumstances. They could say, okay, we want this lady to attend a certain amount of sessions. She'll be released. She'll have to report to the police station 3 times a week. She must reside with a family member, so we know that she's there. She'll have to check in so that people understand that she's not a serial killer going around stabbing up people. These circumstances might have been different as opposed to the person who, so on. So there's, the discretion isn't removed. Whether it's going to help the crime situation or not, that's left to be seen.
A quick follow-up, quick if we can, because I do want to get to the whistleblower protection bill. But with regards to murder in this country, there's basically one category of murder. It's just murder.
Correct.
There's no murder 1, murder 2. Should we, or do we have a need to maybe revisit that so that some distinction can be made? Because I kind of think also part of it is her place and this situation should not be put in the same level. And at least to some
degree. I 100% agree with you, and I would remind the population that that was actually one of the first things that the Ministry of Justice under the People's Partnership government had proposed, the bill, and it would have allowed us to create the most serious category of first-degree murder and to get around that Pratt and Morgan decision and implement the death penalty for those types of murders, as opposed to the type that I had just described to you that we've been reading about in the media and so on, or the man who, plots to murder the neighbor who he found out was, molesting his daughter and situations like that. It would allow for more plea bargaining to take place. It would allow for a whole series of things, and it was 3 categories of murders. And we needed the PNM support when they were in opposition to pass that piece of legislation, and they did not support it. And it was defeated. And you can go back and you can look at it. It was 2011 or 2012 around there that legislation came to Parliament. And that is exactly what we need moving forward, so that we can actually have better categorization of offenses, because murder is not murder. And both of those people, perhaps who I've just described, should not be facing the death penalty.
Now, with that said, I want to move on to the whistleblower protection bill, because I believe your colleague, Senator Wade Mark, he was basically saying, well, look, this thing passes and we might have to, start to challenge it in court almost immediately, because, and I haven't gone into it in detail, but it seems as though there's concerns that the bill goes maybe too far with regards to whistleblower making claims and people who are thus accused being potentially unable to defend themselves effectively or to answer these accusations?
So it comes back to the same argument. When you are, I have no doubt that there's a legitimate aim to be pursued in terms of giving protection to people who wish to make disclosures about wrongdoing, right? That's I think we can all accept that. But there still has to be a balancing of rights. There still has to be, in all, we can't just say, well, we know of a case of a whistleblower now who exposed something, and because of that, we think all whistleblowers should enjoy protection. What about people who use these things vindictively? What about people who may be mistaken and you ruin someone's reputation, their life, their, these kinds of things? The bottom line is this: it's two things. And it's really interesting that the Attorney General can depend on the 24-hour memory, perhaps, of some people to convince them otherwise. But on Monday, we dealt with the validation and testing bill, which affects rights because it subjects people like police officers and so on, and the opposition supported that in terms of being able to polygraph them and so on. On Tuesday, we came with the whistleblower, which affects rights because it affects the person who's the subject of the report. It affects their ability to sue someone and to even prosecute someone who does things against them, or to have access to the court to challenge these things, and it interferes with that right. It protects a whistleblower, even a whistleblower who commits a criminal offense, such as hacking your computer to get your data.
Yeah.
It protects that person from criminal liability. There was no special majority asked for there. And then we come back on Wednesday to deal with bail, which affects, of course, the right to, sorry, my battery is going on, which affects somebody's rights with bail and so on, and they ask for the special majority. So what is the difference between all three matters? Why do you remove the clause? Simply because you think the opposition is not going to support you. So we have a problem with that. The government cannot cherry pick and decide when they want to ask for the majority and when they're going to go with this issue of proportionality and so on. The law is the law, and I don't want to get into a whole legal argument over that, but I don't believe that enough thought was put into that whistleblower protection law. The other thing is that the bill has some serious flaws, and there are things to be worked out so that you understand it to be workable. It says an employer must have a whistleblower protection officer, that you shall have this person who can receive reports and so on. So I asked the question, I said, my doubles man runs about 3 vans. He employs over 20-something people. Does he have to have a whistleblower protection officer and a set of policies and procedures in place? There's no scaling of the law. Sorry?
I've never even heard of that as a position, because I would imagine if a company has that, what do they do if there's no one blowing any whistles? Do they just sit and wait? I've never heard of that position in a private company.
And the government has this tendency, when we ask about the actual implementation and how something is meant to work and how it will work, and we raise concerns, they say, well, we'll deal with that in regulations. But that's not the proper way to make law. This bill, they have been talking about it, and they themselves are lamenting that since 2015 they've wanted to pass the law. You decide now that you are going to rush it for whatever reason, and that's why I think there's speculation that there's some nefarious reason on their part that they want to have this law in place. And they are saying that, they want to have it up and running as the time has come to have it passed. You don't just pass law for the sake of passing it. You pass law that can work. And we want to make sure that the law can work. So since 2015, don't you think that some draft regulation should have been brought forward? A joint select committee met. There's a number of things that this bill really, and if you believe that there was, they say they get some legal opinion, I, for one, and I know a few members of the independent bench have expressed concern to me that they don't agree with this position. The government has taken the position that when it comes to reports, when it comes to legal opinions and so on, they pay for it and belongs to them, and they're not sharing it. So we've been asking over and over and over to see the reports, and see the opinions, see all the investigative reports into the missing files, see the reports into the SSA, etc., etc. And they are refusing to make those reports public. They're refusing to make the legal opinions public.
I just want to segue quickly, because that's an interesting part, because I kind of touched on that today, and I've spoken about things like that before. And I think I even brushed on it before once with you. 2 things there. One, I do wonder if the government too much doesn't understand the difference between public and private and operate in many respects as though this is a private entity with expectations of privacy with regards to how and what they do, as opposed to transparency for controlling the public purse. But then the second point that you made there, well, I'll let you speak about that first point first.
Yeah, no, that is exactly correct. I mean, and I've been saying that the Attorney General says that he's the client and that, you know, he has a certain privileged information as well. You're not the client. The state is the client. You didn't pay for it. The opinion and the reports and all of these things don't belong to you. It doesn't belong to the PNM. It belongs to the it belongs to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So if you're hiring senior counsel and you are paying them money to give a legal opinion on the requirements of the law and what should be done and how something can proceed and what are the shortcomings or the strengths of a piece of legislation, and you are asking the representatives of the people in the parliament to pass it, well, at least, at a minimum, you should share it with the members who you're asking to vote for it. So that's the first thing, and it also speaks to the job because we don't know who they pay. Well, I think eventually I started to make noise about it and he disclosed the name of the senior counsel in relation to the whistleblower, right? That's fine. So now we know who. But before that, it was you didn't know who, you didn't know what they say, you don't know what they, you know, exactly what they recommend. Just that I've been advised and this is the way that I'm going. It's a level of arrogance and a level of refusal to also just have respect for the fact that you are carrying out a public function and that you're spending public monies.
I will actually beg to differ. I think it is an inability. And I basically said that, well, maybe not use that word, but with regards to the Attorney General not wanting to reveal who public money was paid to, what lawyers for the legal briefs, I said at the end of the day, this is not your private law firm, this is the state. Why do they have an expectation of privacy in public business? But the other point I wanted to get to was the fact that, and I said this today, that for certain things, all right, the SSA investigation can be sensitive, but in the states, then intelligence committees in the House, they get to be read on things, both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, behind closed doors. So at least the public could then see both political parties' representatives say, basically come together and say, this is good, this is bad, or whatever. And I do believe I've mentioned this before, to close the Joint Senate Committee on National Security, I would hope that if it's not done, or if it's not done enough, that it will be done more of, that, all right, I know that there's some things that the general public should know, I should know, but you're on a committee, and even if it's behind closed doors, at the very least, you, as a non-PNM member, as a non-government member, could say, well, look, I have seen it, and there's something there, there's nothing there, there's enough there. Give us some degree of
that's how the committees were meant to work. I think apart from the Public Accounts Committee, all of the other, there's some committees chaired by independent senators, but at the end of the day, most of the committees still have a majority government membership. And I think maybe that's something we have to look at now, because you would recall, for example, there was a request immediately when the announcement was made about, you know, firings in the SSA and so on, that Dr. Munilal and I, who sit on the JSC for National Security, had asked for an immediate meeting of the JSC to discuss the matter, and we were denied. We were voted down by the government. So the you know, that's they waited until they were able to, I don't know, come and make their statements in Parliament. And again, the Prime Minister made a number of very shocking, explosive statements in the Parliament now about the SSA. And is it that it's you know, it's about timing and controlling the narrative, or is it about really inquiring into what is taking place in our what should be our premier intelligence agency in the country? So at the end of the day, sometimes politics, I think, gets the better of you know, people put aside what I think is rational and what is sensible, and they put their political what do you call it, one-upmanship as a priority. And that, I think, happens far too often, and it affects the work of committees. But I don't think our committees are functioning in the manner in which they ought to be.
Well, I don't know if that's due in part due to the historical origin of our form of government. It's not an American, it's a British, well, technically Canadian from what I understand. And it is what it is. Constitutional reform is a whole big other question that maybe we could speak about when that becomes more towards the forefront. But
yes.
Senator Lashmida, I want to thank you for joining me today. We're more or less out of time. So thank you for everything that you shared. Of course, we could always continue the conversation next week.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me again. We'll chat.
Okay. Folks, we have to take a break. When we come back, we open the phone lines. Stay tuned. It's Talk About on WSN. You will get to have your say after this.
Hello there and welcome to AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. Before we even start this repatriation and reintegration process, we've already failed or are we doomed to fail?
You've got to invest in the institutions that you've established to carry out those sorts of core functions.
We now get into the regional updates to give you an understanding of what's happening across our neighboring islands.
We have available a number of films that are worth showing.
So it was day one when the French Revolution started to develop the concept of universal human rights.
What happened this time is unprecedented. It's one of the largest terrorist attacks in history.
Let's welcome Carl to the program. Carl is over there next to Seth. Hello, Carl.
Silky anteater or pygmy anteater, and we have 2 of the 3 species of anteaters right here.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
The newest book is here, Closer to the Church, the debut novel by author and former mayor Louis Lee Singh. Available at all the Home Store branches, Barataria, West Mall, Shogunas and C3 San Fernando. Paper-based bookshop 10 Nook Avenue St. Anne's, WESN 30A Gattaca Street Woodbrook, Metropolitan Bookshop Ariapita Avenue Woodbrook, and all RIK bookstores nationwide. Available online as paperback on Amazon.com and Kindle for e-readers. For more info, call 628-5835 or 389-6504. Also available from author Louis Lee Singh, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters, and Local Government in Trinidad, Conspiracy Against the People.
And we're back here on Talking Point, and now is the time, folks, that we open up the phone lines. We want to hear from you, the viewer, where you can have your say. You could speak about what we just spoke about, and that was basically the beginning of, I guess you could say, the conversation as we look into these various legislations coming down the pipe. Part of it is implementation, so it's not just to see what has been said so far, but also, at least with regards to whistleblower, you know, what more further details on the implementation is going to come down. I do agree with the senator, though, to some extent, using regulations to make up for shortfalls in legislation. I'm not entirely sure if that's the correct way to do it. Yes, something should be in regulations, but then sometimes for certain laws, if you want these things to be properly enshrined in law, these protections, some of it has to be detailed in the law to ensure there's no wiggle room anywhere for people to kind of get out of it. And what does Karen always say? What does some of the callers always say? There's an implementation deficit in the country. Deficit, my word. Implementation problem, a topic that others have spoken about. I myself have also found that to be true. And I think one of the things with the whistleblower protections that I wanted to point out And Senator Shmidal, I think she touched on this, but with false allegations, we need to understand false allegations is a very real thing, right? Because we might think, oh, people won't do that. People won't take advantage of the system and make stuff up, right? Except think about what happened when politically in certain parts of the world, people who came across as the victim were basically treated as sacred cows until it was found out that not all of them, but too often, certain allegations, whether it be of racial discrimination or sexual misconduct, sexual assault, they were made up, they were false. But at the time, it was treated as though, well, we have to believe the victim 100%. We can't question their story, we can't investigate, we can't doubt them in any way, no matter how good or bad their story sounds, right, with regards to the evidence. And then, of course, we find out in some cases, they weren't on the up and up. And some people might have been surprised, but I wasn't, because I know human nature. Human nature will take advantage of things. And if you make something protected where it cannot be questioned, people will take advantage of those protections where possible. Not everybody's going to do it. Not every whistleblower is going to be in bad faith. But you give people an inch, and some will take a mile. You only need a couple to spoil the whole situation. We have our first caller for the morning from Mova. Good morning, caller. You're on the air. Morning, caller. Yeah.
You know what I realized? I don't think you really know the PNM as good as I do. You know, I've studied PNM all my life. You know, and when I heard Visual Hines make that statement yesterday about this 30,000 or 30 million, whatever. I find the whole thing was funny. And you said it, you know, you said that on one hand it's right and on the next hand it's wrong. No, the PNM has a history of not following through with things, you know. And when I listen to Fitzgerald, I mean, I have known Fitzgerald Hines since he has been into politics, and nothing this man says impresses me, or I would believe. The man seems he seems to just, when he's asked a question, he comes and he makes his grand statement, and then he walks away and he smiles, and that is it. And that is the same way I would take what did he just say. But I realize that you still have hope, you know. I am telling you, Sean, as a 70-year-old person in this country for years, there's nothing that comes out of the PNM that I have any hope in. I've studied them for years. I never voted for them, and I'm from over. You understand? So I know them.
Yeah.
And I want to tell you something else. In the face of all that is wrong in Trinidad and Tobago today, and I said it before, how on earth people are still finding time to criticize the UNC is beyond me. I listened to the senator just now, and what she said about when they tried to move away from the Pratt and Morgan, and the PNM didn't vote for it. The amount of energy and time that has been put by the PNM and various people in the media criticizing the UNC for not supporting the bail bill and supporting these things that really, if you're going to them, will make little difference. And while you're doing that, you don't have a plan for our major problems today. And Sean, my last point. Are you aware that we have a serious noise pollution problem in Trinidad and Tobago?
A serious what?
Serious noise pollution problem in this country. Are you all aware?
Probably I think it's one of those things that we just deal with, unfortunately, and wrongfully so.
Well, so if it's one thing I would blame, and I wish I was able to tell that to the senator that was just there. One of the things I would blame the UNC for is to be ignoring that noise pollution problem the same way the PNM is. Right? And I have been writing letters, and I'm still writing numerous letters on this issue. You know, and I would like that maybe you all could bring someone and have an in-depth discussion with it, because it's really bad, you know, Sean. It's really, really bad, you know. And they are just ignoring it. And the Prime Minister, let me just say this last thing. The Prime Minister, when he was announcing the removal of the restrictions for COVID, you know what this man said? He said, beaches are now open, rivers are now open, and loud music can now be played. Somehow the media didn't see that as a statement for them to question the man and ask him, what the heck did you mean by that? I'm out. Thanks.
Caller, I I can't fault you for your position. I think we take it for granted. I think we take the whole noise pollution thing for granted. It is what it is, and we use the excuse of, well, that's we thing, that's the culture, blah, 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 blah. We want effect, blah, 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 blah. But I think you're right, because at times it gets out of hand. And even if there probably is a way to do it reasonably, certain locations, certain noise, and then certain other locations where it shouldn't be allowed. And my co-host, Keaton Shah, host of AM Prime, he has pointed out the fact that there was a situation by him where a supermarket, of all places, was basically creating noise pollution. And the authorities, the local authorities, were informally protecting it or not doing anything about it or ignoring it. So I think you're right about that. I think part of it is what I go back to with the informal application of the law, all the gray area, the wiggle room, and really and truly, and then of course there's the fact that there are some amount of police officers, some fraction of them who are not good at their job. So it's subjective, and then on top of that, you're gonna get officers who, of course, the bad ones are also gonna overreact at times. Take that for what you will. But a lot of it is going to be they're going to ignore it, or they're going to, it's their partner, they don't want to do anything about it, blah, 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 blah. Right? EMA, what could they do? Do they have enough teeth to deal with it? Do they have enough personnel and resources to deal with how widespread it is? I don't know. Because in part, we use the excuse of culture, but also one could argue the problem is that it is cultural. It is cultural. It's so cultural, it's in politics. It's in advertising. Because one of the things that I saw most recently, before I came up to Tobago, was I think it was a music truck to advertise some private venture. So it's driving slow along, I think it was either Tragic Road or Arapita Avenue. It was driving slow with loud music. Why? Why? Outside of maybe Carnival, and even then, Carnival Monday and Tuesday, obviously, that it is what it is. Leading up to Carnival, even that and all, I think there should be certain specified limits, whatever we determine it to be, and not just kind of, well, you know, it's Carnival period, it's Carnival season. What does that mean? But politics and private business both utilize similar tactics throughout the year to get their message out there. And it's not just a loudspeaker on a car saying, you know, vote for this because of that. This is what this means, blah, 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 pointing out things about legislator ideology or technical information. No, it's a jingle, loud, and then a DJ and a hype man shouting into a mic about who you're going to vote for and blah, 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 blah. Should that be allowed? I don't know. It's effective. And again, it's effective because it's cultural. But to some extent, I have an issue with that. I would have preferred for individuals to go out and hold town hall meetings to present themselves to the public, for the public to engage in that in whatever shape or form those meetings could be. It could be on the street, it could be in a town hall, in a school hall, whatever, right? Something that's formal, that has authorization, permission for, that will not disrupt the community too much, etc., etc. Now, with regards to some of the other things you said, I'm not saying that I believe Fitzgerald Hines in everything he says, or I support him in everything he does. I'm just saying I don't want to judge the content always by the messenger. Sometimes the messenger is important context. Sometimes. But at some point, they're the government, and we cannot just say, well, because they're the government, and because we believe they're bad, and because they have a history, some of it which is bad, everything they say and do is automatically bad. I don't think everything the government says and do is automatically bad, PNM or not, UNC, it doesn't matter, right? I do appreciate, to some extent, the COVID response, except the part about the borders. That is where their policy didn't just fall flat, but was not just counterproductive, but was disingenuous and one could even argue borderline illegal or negligent, because the real issue was the fact that you're going to keep people outside of the country and yet illegal immigrants coming in unabated. But with that said, this situation is, and I do believe one of the criticisms is, you know, it could be a waste of resources. It's not a big capital investment into the competition. That's number one. Number two, it might not even been the minister's idea. Number three, again, I get it. You want to see him more involved in the actual crime fighting. But to some extent, he is one of the stakeholders, and this is part of one of the things that they should be doing. If they weren't doing this, they would be criticized. So I'm not going to criticize him for doing it. I don't expect this to take 8 hours out of his day every day. And this should not be 20% of his budget. This is a small investment for potentially, it doesn't have to be great returns. It just has to be greater than what was invested for it to be worth it, which I think it easily can be. I get it. The PNM has an implementation problem. The PNM has a perception problem. The PNM has a lot of problems that potentially they're going to have to face the music come the next general election. Or will they? But that is a them. But I'm still going to judge everything they say or do and everything they bring to the table on the basis of what it is individually, right? Yes, obviously, the context of them bringing it forward will then be pertinent when there are practical, direct things I could point to with regards to, well, this is what they did the last time in a similar situation. So they're not telling us how they're going to implement it. They're going to say it's going to be implemented fine, but with their track record, this is what we've seen them do. Then I could bring it in, because they've left a vacuum, I could fill it in with their past. But something like this, I don't think it's there yet. I don't think it's pertinent yet, right? And at the end of the day, an overall holistic approach against crime will include measures like this. But again, if you then want to go on and criticize the government for not doing anything about improving the situation with education, for dealing with the fact that job creation seemingly is not fast enough, that career advancements, that diversification is not good enough, and the lack of opportunity in society and the economy is part of what's pushing these young men to crime, a lack of cultural identity, a lack of support, a lack of hope from other quarters, fine. Because I do think a holistic approach shouldn't just stop at what one ministry is doing. It should be a lot of various ministries, what they should be doing. And with regards to criticizing the opposition, at the end of the day, I have to be fair. And if I think the opposition's work is ineffective at times, or inefficient at times, or just plain wrong at times, I have to call it out. Because a weak opposition leads us with this government being voted back in. And some people don't want to hear that. And I'm not saying that I think the PNM should be voted out. I'll leave that to the viewers. I'm not stating my opinion on what the election results should be. I'm just saying, for those who don't like the government, the default should not be then we hold the opposition as this sacred, cannot do no wrong institution that we do not criticize as well, because criticism should be constructive and we should want the opposition to do better, because a stronger opposition will compete with the government and be in a better position, if necessary, to be an alternative to the PNM. But do we have that? I don't know. San Fernando has been waiting. I'm sorry, but I just wanted to get that out. San Fernando, good morning. You're on here.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
Well, I see we now have triple murders in Tobago.
Quadruple. The wounded man died at hospital.
Okay, well, it is so sad that Tobago doesn't have the same sort of circumstances in terms of what you would see as hotspots in Trinidad, where we have a lot of state housing projects where these things come out of, and it's still happening in Tobago. sad to say that. But that is not what I call. What I to call about is your comment on that competition with Fitzgerald Hines mentioning that I understand where you're coming from. It's something small that is needed. I agree with that. It is needed. The messenger, however, the problem is it pisses off people because of the messenger. The messenger is the problem in this whole issue. And on the back of that, what I really want to say is, school has now been officially closed. There are hundreds, and I am saying this, there are hundreds of sporting facilities, community centers in this country. And that is a way to, when school is closed, to try and build a better society, to get children out of the house, to get them to involved in community, in a community. And I have not seen, I was expecting, and probably my expectation is too much, that the state would do the basic, come out with loudspeakers, and 2 months ago, and ask for citizens who wouldn't have volunteered in the community to have these camps. Let people like me and some of my friends who have the time to say, hey, you know, I could devote 4 hours, 3 times a week, 4 times a week, or whatever it is, and come out and give of my time to the community to try and make a better Trinidad and Tobago. Because I'm saying, Sean, I have driven around. All these sporting facilities are empty.
Mm-hmm.
They have nothing going on in them. They have numerous amongst them in San Fernando alone. There is nothing going on in them. And this is where the short-sightedness of the people within the government. And this is a collective thing. The Ministry of Sport, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Community Development, all 3 of them should be working together to say, let us do this.
Yeah.
Because perennially, they have these little camps, you know. But the camps, when they have the camps start late in the season, in the vacation time, and they're not, and they don't have them for long.
Yeah.
They start late and they don't have them for long. And it's time they look at this and say, here we're going on. They must have people in the community willing to volunteer. Come out with a loudspeaker, just like how people, when they're announcing a death announcement in the country, they come up with a higher loudspeaker and drive around. The same thing they do when TNT go in and take off lights in areas. TNT higher loudspeaker and drive around the community and do the same thing. So I mean, that's where I am today, Sean. Have a good day.
I have a follow-up to that, because you're correct. You're correct. The thing is, you might not even need to advertise it all that much. Young people will get the word on the street. You have the lights on and activity going on. Structured, large scale, not like, okay, 5 people in a court trying to play basketball or football or whatever, right? You have activity going on. Structured, organized. The community will eventually, everybody will know about it. It will spread. People will spread it amongst themselves. The thing is, it doesn't even have to be limited to the summer vacation, although that's when you probably should double the efforts during the day and during the night. And the reason why I say during the night is, in the United States, there's an initiative, right? It started in the 90s and it was brought back. It was curbed a bit with COVID, I think, but it might be more than one initiative. There's a national one, and I heard of one in a city, right, where essentially nighttime you keep the basketball courts open in the US, right? And in the midnight basketball program, which started in the 90s, the idea was actually to have people playing basketball between the hours of 10 and 2 a.m., 10 p.m., 2 a.m., peak crime hours for them, to get the young people off the streets, 14 to 29-year-olds, get them to play basketball, to do something constructive. I think in one city in particular, I can't remember if it's Los Angeles, Oakland, Baltimore, Chicago or New York, I can't remember which city it is, they would have the courts open throughout the afternoon into the evening up until 11. Used to be 12, but with COVID, they kind of brought it down to 11. And the key part with this is they will have a police presence there to ensure, because you can't just have these initiatives and kind of leave them out to the wolves to interfere with. They would have a police presence there to kind of keep it safe, and then allow various stakeholders to engage with young people to have basketball tournaments, basketball matches, sporting events, etc., etc. And all of the potential ancillaries that come around that, you know, drinks vendors, foods vendors, whatever, right? Maybe a little DJ, maybe not a DJ, depending on the location, and right? But the idea is, okay, maybe we don't want to go until 2 a.m. But if we have basketball up until 10 p.m., 11 p.m., right? Depending on where the court is, or a football session, right? Where the field is, etc., etc. First of all, I would expect that a police presence at night should be heavy. Maybe I'm wrong. I am under the impression that there are more police officers out during the day shift than the night shift. Now, we've had murders both in broad daylight and at night, so make of that what you will. With that said, the whole point is, not only do you occupy young people's time, but you literally, at least in the example that I saw, which was specific to a city, you tire them out. It might seem very basic, but you give them something to put their energy to, something to look forward to. And then also there's the added effect of, wait, they don't have a community. This gives them a sense of community. This gives them a sense of belonging. This gives them something to work towards, instead of working towards advancement in a gang. Instead of working towards, how do I improve my criminal profits? This gives the young people something positive to build towards. Team sports, other activities helps young people learn certain amounts of responsibility, certain amounts of teamwork, very necessary skills moving up into the working world, becoming an adult. But it also just gives them something to focus on, expend their energy on, that they then do not have enough of it to be involved in crime. But you also then, you need to have the opportunity for these programs to exist. NGOs could develop, depending, I don't necessarily want to see it all government run, but the government should be involved to help provide the infrastructure and the security, police. But these things could develop further and further if people buy into them, and I'm mainly speaking about the government and NGOs and organizers, etc., etc. And out of it too, sport could then lead to finding out heroes in sports, showcasing our excellence in sports, which those like Torpedo Thompson and Keyshawn Walcott and others have shown us. Hasty Crawford, Atto Bolden, Shaka Hislop, Dwight York have shown us, have shown the world. But part of it now is to provide the environment, and as humble as it may sound, who knows, we might get maybe an international football player or soccer player who made their start in these programs. Obviously not necessarily their whole development. And that and all, just one example like that, will inject so much hope into the lives of young people that it might make the whole thing, if we look to do something like it, worth it. It might pay for itself. That sense of national identity probably impacts productivity and GDP more than we know. But right now, we live in a country where businessmen and politicians both are very lazy in a general sense. Most businesses are import to retail, and most politicians just go through the motions. Where's the innovation? We hardly ever see it, and we hardly ever see people wanting to take the risk, wanting to put in the work, wanting to put out the effort to do anything more than just the norm. With that said, we're over time, so we'll end the show here today. I want to thank our callers and my guests this morning. For those of you who are now, I know I haven't spoken about the situation with the concerns about dengue, as well as to some extent chikungunya and Zika. We'll speak on that on a later date, maybe tomorrow. But stay safe out there. Pay attention to the recommendations, as basic and as obvious they seem. Don't take it for granted, particularly in this now potential rainy, violent, wetter than wet season, potentially. Stay safe out there. Make today a good day, as my co-host always says. Make of it the best that you can. Try to be positive. Stay safe. Remember your allegiance to this Twin Island Republic. And we will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Nah, you don't need to register nothing. You don't need, we can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
We believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploiting the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for, it's called loss and damage. And we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this is screening. You must screen
screen,
because it's silent.
it's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up, Doc? Every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
This is the navigation system of Europe. So here they're really hoping to stop what we're calling the launcher crisis in Europe. Now, if you want to watch it, maybe for all of our viewers, it's broadcast live on ESA's YouTube channel and web TV.